My parents humiliated me at my sister's graduation. They joked I was a mistake. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of chatter filled the restaurant. The long table was dressed with white linens, bouquets of lilies, and little gold cards with everyone's name. She sat near the middle, half listening to her uncle's story about some fishing trip, when her father stood to give a toast. He cleared his throat, raising his glass toward her sister at the far end of the table. "We're so proud of our girl," he said, smiling warmly at the rows of faces turned his way. "First in the family to graduate summa cum laude. She's made every sacrifice worth it." Her mother, sitting beside him, leaned in with a grin that made her uneasy. "Oh, and speaking of sacrifices," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "remember when we weren't even planning on having another kid?" A few polite chuckles drifted from the table, but her mother kept going. "Yeah," she laughed. "You know, she was our little surprise. Total accident. We had to cancel our trip to Europe because of her. Changed everything." There was a beat of silence before the laughter started, loud, genuine, from almost every corner. A few relatives smacked the table. Someone pulled out their phone, recording. Her sister covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. She tried to smile, tried to play along, but her face felt frozen. Her father wasn't helping. "It's true," he added, chuckling like it was the best joke he'd ever told. "We told ourselves, well, guess we'll just make the best of it." The laughter grew again, a ripple passing through the table. Her mother leaned back, looking pleased with herself, sipping wine like nothing had happened. Around her, people were whispering, glancing her way, then back to each other with smirks. She stared at her plate. The food blurred. Her stomach clenched so tightly it felt like she couldn't breathe. Every word replayed in her head. Accident, ruined plans, had to make the best of it. She wasn't even sure if she'd said anything out loud. Her aunt, seated next to her, gave a little pat on her arm and murmured, "Oh, don't take it so seriously. They're just joking." But the words made it worse. It wasn't a joke. Not to her. She could still hear the laughter echoing, even as the conversation shifted to her sister's job offers and future plans. Her sister leaned in toward her fiancé and whispered something that made him grin. Her mother reached over to tuck a strand of hair behind her sister's ear like she was the star of the night, which, of course, she was. No one noticed how quiet she had become. No one asked if she was okay. She swallowed hard, pushing the food around her plate, pretending to listen, while every second at that table made her want to disappear. She pushed her chair back and stood, feeling every eye at the table still buzzing from the joke. Her mouth stretched into a smile she didn't feel. "Excuse me," she said lightly, as if she just needed a quick break. Her voice sounded steady, even cheerful, and no one questioned her. She walked toward the back of the restaurant, weaving between tables filled with strangers. The sound of clinking glasses and overlapping conversations grew muffled in her ears, replaced by the heavy thud of her own heartbeat. She headed straight past the women's restroom door without slowing down. A cool blast of night air hit her as she stepped outside. The faint smell of grilled food drifted from the kitchen vents. She didn't stop to think. She just kept walking, heels tapping against the pavement, moving faster once she reached the corner. Her mind spun, not with confusion, but with an almost sharp clarity. Each step seemed to bring another memory she hadn't wanted to examine before. The quick dismissals when she'd asked for something small. The way conversations always circled back to her sister's achievement. The times she'd been left out of family trips because it was too much hassle. She had told herself those moments didn't matter. She had laughed them off, convinced herself they were harmless. But tonight cracked something wide open. That one careless remark at the table wasn't an accident. It was exactly how they saw her. The night was quiet except for a few passing cars. Street lights painted pale circles on the sidewalk. She realized she had no plan for where she was going. She just knew she couldn't turn back. Her hands felt cold even though the air was warm. She pictured them inside, plates being cleared, dessert menus handed out. Probably still talking about her sister's bright future. Maybe someone would notice she'd been gone for a while. Maybe not. The thought didn't hurt. It just felt like confirmation. A bus rolled past, its windows glowing yellow. She thought about getting on, riding anywhere, but kept walking instead. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't look. She didn't want to see her mother's name, or worse, a group text with another round of jokes. By the time she slowed down, she had crossed several blocks, and the restaurant was far behind. The noise of the evening crowd had faded, replaced by the hum of streetlights and the distant bark of a dog. She stopped near a small park and sat on an empty bench. Her chest felt tight, but her breathing was steady. The weight pressing down wasn't confusion anymore. It was the understanding that nothing was going to change. She had walked out without a word, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she owed them an explanation. She sat there on the park bench, her fingers curled loosely in her lap, and her mind drifted backward without her meaning to. The images came quickly, one after another, as if they'd been waiting for the right moment to surface. She was 9, standing in the kitchen with a flyer for a school art camp in her hand. She had practiced how to ask for it, ready to promise she'd help with chores to cover the cost. Her mother had barely looked up from the grocery list before saying, "We can't afford extras right now." 2 weeks later, her sister was enrolled in a gymnastics program with a monthly fee that made the camp look cheap. Another memory surfaced, her 13th birthday. She remembered sitting at the small kitchen table, a single cupcake with a candle in front of her. Her father had handed her a card with $20 inside and said, "Sorry, we've been busy, but we'll celebrate properly next weekend." The weekend came and went with no mention of it again. That same year, her sister's birthday had a catered party, balloons filling the living room, and a gift that was too big to wrap. She thought about the time she had started looking at colleges. She had been excited, showing her parents brochures from different campuses. Her father had sighed, telling her they didn't have much set aside for tuition. "You'll probably need to take out loans," he'd said, like it was just the way things were. Not long after, she overheard a conversation about her sister's new car, a sleek, expensive one, paid for entirely from college savings. She had never pushed too hard, never demanded explanations. She told herself her parents weren't doing it on purpose. Maybe her sister just needed more. Maybe the timing was always bad when it came to her. It was easier to believe that than to think they cared less. But sitting there now, under the dim park light, she couldn't make those excuses fit anymore. Tonight had taken all those small, quiet moments and strung them together into something undeniable. The favoritism hadn't been subtle. She had just been too willing to ignore it. She could see the pattern stretching all the way back, clear and sharp, like looking at a trail of footprints in the snow. The same faces smiling warmly at her sister, the same voices telling her to understand, to be patient, to not take things personally. The night air was still, the street beyond the park nearly empty. She leaned back against the bench, staring at the sky through the branches above. There was no anger in her face yet, only a deep, heavy awareness. All those years she had tried to believe she was treated the same. Now she knew the truth had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. She unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside without turning on the main light. The quiet felt heavy after the noise of the evening. Dropping her bag on the couch, she toed off her shoes and sank onto the edge of the cushions. Her phone was still in her hand. She told herself she would check a few messages, maybe distract herself with something harmless before bed. But the first notification that caught her eye had her cousin's name attached to it. She tapped without thinking. The video started playing instantly. It was shot from the end of the table, a shaky phone recording. Her father was mid-sentence, glass raised, and then her mother's voice chimed in. The exact words from earlier spilled out of the speaker, loud and clear, followed by that same burst of laughter. The clip was only 20 seconds long, but it replayed the worst moment of the night perfectly. Below the video were rows of comments. Some were just laughing emojis. Others wrote things like, "Classic. Can't believe they said that out loud." A few people tagged friends, clearly finding it too funny not to share. Her thumb scrolled without her meaning to. Near the top of the thread were 2 familiar names, her mother and father. Each had liked the post. Her mother had even commented, "What can I say? We tell it like it is." She set the phone down on the coffee table for a moment, pressing her palms against her knees. There was a strange stillness in her chest, as if her body was holding its breath. She picked the phone back up and watched the clip again. She noticed details she had missed at the table. The way her sister glanced at her before looking back toward her fiancé, the little smirk that had passed between them. She saw herself in the corner of the frame, her smile tight, her hands under the table. Something inside her shifted. It wasn't the same dull ache she'd carried for years. It was sharper, cleaner, like glass breaking. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment slip. They thought it was fine to share, to joke again online, to let other people laugh at her expense. The accident line wasn't just a one-time remark. It was a label they were willing to wear proudly. She closed the app and tossed the phone onto the couch, but the image stayed in her head anyway. The sound of their voices felt louder now, even in the silent room. She stood and paced once, twice, before stopping by the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, and for the first time all night, she didn't feel small. Whatever had been holding her back before was gone. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew she wasn't going to let it go. She stayed by the window for a long time, her arms crossed, staring at the street below. Somewhere in the quiet, an old memory surfaced. Not the kind that hurt, but the kind that suddenly changes everything. It had been almost a year ago. Her father had asked her to come over one weekend to help him organize some files in his home office. He'd said he was falling behind and needed a fresh pair of eyes to sort through receipts and tax forms. She had agreed without thinking much of it. The desk had been piled with folders, some so full that the edges had curled. As she worked through them, she noticed something odd in the paperwork. There were tax forms that didn't match, documents with numbers that didn't add up, and transfers to accounts she didn't recognize. A few were marked with locations outside the country. She had asked about them in passing, holding up a sheet with a string of unfamiliar account numbers. He had barely looked up from his computer, just muttering, "Business stuff, nothing you need to worry about." She remembered how quickly he'd taken the folder from her hands after that. At the time, she had dropped it. But a week later, while cleaning out her old laptop, she found a backup of some of the files she had scanned that day. She had kept them without any real plan, just in case. Then there was her mother's charity. It had always seemed strange to her. The events were grand, with expensive venues and catered dinners, but the actual donations to causes were small. She'd overheard her mother once on the phone, laughing about creative accounting and how it keeps the board happy. One afternoon, she had been left alone in her parents' living room while they were upstairs. A binder sat open on the coffee table, full of statements showing the charity's funds being used for travel, clothes, and home renovations. She hadn't meant to snoop, but once she saw the numbers, it was impossible not to understand. She had never told anyone about either discovery. It wasn't her business, she had told herself then. If they wanted to handle things that way, it was their risk. She had closed the files and walked away. Now, standing in her own living room, those memories didn't feel harmless anymore. They felt like something solid, something powerful. She realized she knew enough to ruin them, not just in their social circles but legally. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she turned away from the window. She went to her closet, pulled out an old storage box, and dug until she found the USB drive she had kept tucked inside a small envelope. It was still there, untouched since the day she saved those files. Her fingers closed around it. This wasn't just leverage. This was the one thing they could never laugh off. She sat at her desk with the USB drive plugged into her laptop, the glow of the screen lighting up the dark room. The first step was going through everything she had saved before. Each document, each file, each scanned page. She created folders, labeling them clearly, making sure nothing was misplaced. Once she had the old files sorted, she began looking for more. She logged into public databases to search for her mother's charity record. Every annual filing was there, plain for anyone to see, and the numbers told the same story she had noticed before. Large sums coming in, but only a small fraction going toward actual donations. She opened her email and scrolled through years of old messages, pulling out anything related to her parents' business or the charity. She took screenshots of conversations that showed transfers, purchases, and strange expenses. The work was slow, but she didn't rush. Each file she saved was another piece of the puzzle. From there, she went deeper. She found bank account statements that had been emailed to her once when her father had asked her to check something while he was traveling. She had forgotten they were still sitting in her inbox. Now she downloaded them, one by one, and added them to the growing collection. By the time she stopped, her desktop was cluttered with folders full of proof, dates, amounts, account numbers, and documents that connected everything together. She knew she couldn't rely only on her own eyes, so she sent a message to someone she trusted. Her friend Mark had worked in finance for over a decade. They hadn't talked in months, but she knew he could understand what she was looking at. She asked if he could meet her for coffee the next morning, saying it was important. He agreed without asking questions. When they sat down in the corner of a quiet cafe, she slid her laptop across the table and let him scroll through the files. At first, his face was neutral. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. By the time he reached the charity records, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "This isn't just bad bookkeeping," he said, lowering his voice. "This is criminal. We're talking fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, serious stuff. If this ever gets to the wrong people, they could be looking at prison." She took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Mark stared at her for a moment, maybe trying to decide if she meant it. But she didn't look away. When he realized she was serious, he closed the laptop slowly and said, "Then you've got more than enough. You just have to decide when to use it." She already knew the answer to that. The weeks passed quietly, at least on the surface. She went to work, answered texts when needed, and stayed out of her parents' way. But every night, she looked at the folders on her laptop, adding small details here and there. She was patient, waiting for the right moment, because she knew one would come. The invitation arrived in the mail in a thick cream envelope, her sister's name embossed in gold. Inside was the announcement for the engagement party, black tie, hosted at one of the most expensive hotels in the city. The guest list wasn't written out, but she could guess who would be there. Family, friends, her parents' business contacts, and plenty of people from the local society pages. She turned the card over in her hand, reading the date twice. This was the kind of event her parents lived for: public, polished, and full of chances to show off. If they wanted to play perfect hosts in front of an audience, this was where she would end it. Over the next few days, she confirmed details without raising suspicion. She called the hotel under the pretense of checking her RSVP and asked about the event setup. She learned there would be a large screen for photos and speeches, microphones at every table, and a photographer moving through the crowd. It was exactly what she needed. Her plan took shape piece by piece. She created a short video, carefully edited, starting with warm images of her sister's engagement announcement, then smoothly shifting into the footage of her parents' mistake joke from the graduation dinner. From there, she inserted screenshots of documents, bank transfers, and charity records, each labeled clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. She kept it under 3 minutes, long enough to make her point, short enough to keep everyone's attention. She saved copies to multiple drives and emailed one to herself under a vague subject line. Another copy went to a secure folder she could access from her phone, just in case. The day of the party arrived with perfect weather, which she knew her mother would take as a good omen. Guests would be in their finest clothes, drinks in hand, ready to hear speeches about love and family. She could picture her parents glowing under the attention, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments. As she stood in front of her mirror that evening, she adjusted her dress and fastened a pair of earrings. Her bag was small, but inside was her phone with the file ready to play. She looked at her reflection and felt calm. No shaking hands, no rush of nerves. This wasn't just going to be a scene. It was going to be a turning point, the kind people would talk about long after the flowers and champagne from the party were gone. And she was ready to begin. The ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, the air filled with soft music and the sound of clinking glasses. She sat near the front, watching her sister and fiancé stand beside her parents at the head table. Laughter rolled through the crowd as her father told a story about the couple meeting. Cameras flashed. When the speeches began, one by one, friends and relatives stepped up to the microphone. Compliments flowed easily about her sister's beauty, her ambition, their perfect family. She kept her eyes forward, hands resting lightly in her lap. Finally, her father announced, "And now my other daughter would like to say a few words." The phrasing made a few people chuckle. She rose smoothly, her dress catching the light, and took the mic with a small smile. "I just want to congratulate my sister," she began, her voice warm and steady. "You found someone who makes you happy, and I wish you both a lifetime of good memories." Her sister smiled, a little surprised, and some of the tension in the room eased. She paused, letting the quiet settle. "And," she continued, "since we're all here to celebrate family, I thought it would be nice to share some memories of our own." She glanced toward the screen behind her. At her subtle nod, the lights dimmed slightly and the video began to play. The first clip was from the graduation dinner. Her mother's voice filled the room. "She was our little surprise. Total accident." Laughter followed on screen, the same as it had that night. The video cut to her father adding, "We had to make the best of it." More laughter. The audience's real laughter died quickly. Murmurs rippled through the tables. Then the images shifted. Screenshots of bank statements, transfers to offshore accounts, and documents from the charity showing thousands spent on luxury items instead of donations. Each page was clear, labeled, impossible to misread. She had even highlighted certain numbers in bright yellow. Gasps broke out. Someone near the back whispered loudly enough to carry, "Oh my God." A few guests raised their phones, recording the screen. Others turned in their seats, looking at her parents. Her mother's face had gone pale. Her father was frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Her sister looked from them to the screen, confusion and panic mixing in her eyes. The final frame of the video was simple, a list of dates and amounts, ending with the words "public records available upon request." When the lights came back up, the room felt heavier, every movement sharp in the quiet. She handed the mic back without another word and returned to her seat. No one clapped. No one smiled. Conversations began in low, urgent tones, and she could feel the shift. Whatever image her parents had worked to protect had cracked wide open. The silence after the video didn't last long. People began standing, some slipping toward the exits without saying goodbye. A few guests left their half-finished drinks on the tables. The hotel staff moved awkwardly between them, unsure whether to keep serving or clear everything away. At the head table, her sister's fiancé leaned in close, speaking to his parents. Their expressions hardened. Within minutes, they were on their feet, shaking hands with no one, making a straight line for the door. Her sister followed them halfway before stopping, glancing back at her parents with a look that was more fear than concern. By the next morning, The party photos had already vanished from social media. In their place were blurry clips of the video, posted by guests who hadn't been able to look away. Comments spread fast, asking if the rumors about fraud were true. 2 days later, a reporter showed up outside her parents' house. When the story hit the local paper, the headline wasn't about the engagement. It was about alleged misuse of charitable funds and undisclosed foreign accounts. The charity's website went offline overnight. The official statement claimed temporary closure for review, but she knew it wasn't temporary. Bank accounts linked to it were frozen, and investigators had begun requesting records. Her parents stopped answering most calls. When they did speak to people, their voices were tight, defensive. She heard through a cousin that they'd hired 2 lawyers, one for the charity and one for her father's finance. Her sister's engagement fell apart in less than a week. The fiancé's family made it clear they didn't want their name tied to a scandal. Her sister moved back into her old bedroom, slamming doors and avoiding neighbors. She told anyone who would listen that her life had been destroyed by other people's mistakes. Once, her sister tried calling her. The voicemail was short and bitter. "You didn't just go after them. You went after me. I hope you're happy." She didn't reply. Within 10 days of the party, official notices were delivered to her parents' door. Court dates were set. The charges were spelled out in plain language: fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The possibility of prison was no longer just talk. The same relatives who had laughed at the joke now kept their distance. Invitations stopped. Old friends quietly unfollowed her parents online. From a distance, she watched it all unfold. It wasn't quick and it wasn't clean, but it was steady. Every piece of their perfect image had been stripped away. And for the first time, they couldn't blame her for overreacting or misunderstanding. The truth was out in public now, and they were too busy fighting for themselves to control the story. The city she lived in now felt nothing like the one she had left behind. The streets were wider, the air smelled faintly of salt from the nearby coast, and the nights were quieter. Her apartment was small but bright, with sunlight spilling across the kitchen every morning. She could hear the hum of life outside without feeling crowded by it. Her days were full in a way that made sense. She walked to work at a job she had wanted for years, one that kept her busy but left her enough energy to enjoy her evening. The people there knew her as the woman who stayed late to finish projects and always brought good coffee to meetings. No one knew her as the other daughter or the mistake. She had built her new life carefully, step by step. The furniture was hers. The photos on the shelves were of friends and places she'd been, not of family gatherings she hadn't enjoyed. She learned the best cafes in the neighborhood, the quiet park where she could read for hours, and the weekend market where the vendors greeted her by name. Her phone no longer lit up with calls from her parents. She had blocked their numbers months earlier, right after the party. Even when her sister tried to reach her through mutual friends, she didn't answer. The silence wasn't cold, it was peaceful. Occasionally, news about them still reached her. A distant cousin mentioned seeing her parents at the courthouse. An old neighbor sent a message saying the family house was up for sale. None of it stirred the old feeling. She listened, nodded, and went back to her day. She didn't miss them. That surprised her at first. She thought there might be guilt, or at least an ache, but there was nothing except the steady sense that she had finally stepped out from under something heavy. One afternoon, while sitting at the cafe near her apartment, a coworker asked about her family. The question was casual, just part of a friendly conversation. She set her cup down, meeting their eyes with a faint smile. "They made a mistake," she said, her tone even. "And I fixed it." The coworker laughed lightly, not knowing the weight behind the words, and the conversation moved on. She didn't feel the need to explain. The truth was hers alone now, and she had no interest in reliving it for anyone else's curiosity. As she walked home that evening, the sun low over the water, she realized that the life she had now wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about space, choice, and the knowledge that she had taken control of her own story. And she wasn't giving it back.